In 2005, we were a real country. Video game adaptations of movies were in full swing, so it made sense to have one made about the last installment of the most iconic movie franchise of all time. A lot of other movie video games ended up being pretty bad, so this one stood out from the pack with how well made it was. I personally have a ton of love for this game, and hopefully this video will convince you that you should too. The opening mission throws you right into the action and keeps things simple. You have your square and your triangle. Hit the buttons until you win. You go through the hangar taking on groups of droids, and the game lets you put everything you've learned thus far and use for crowd control at the end. Obi-Wan randomly yells out that lightsabers can block blasters. Obi-Wan's advice is a natural way to integrate tips into the game, but Anakin should know that he can deflect blaster bolts at this point in time. I'm not saying that it should have been changed, and it is good information if this is your first piece of Star Wars media. There really wasn't a good way to have Obi-Wan say that line, so it is what it is. Outside of that nitpick, the first level is pretty fun, and it's nice to see the way this game inspired stuff like The Force Unleashed. The rest of the early areas consist of Obi-Wan and Anakin fighting their way through the invisible hand. It's fun, but there isn't a lot of things to say about it. You fight droids, then you fight some more. The real fun starts when we get to Dooku. Dooku is the first skill gate of the game. Up until this level, you can kinda press random buttons if you feel like it and get by on lower difficulties. His level shows that if you come into these boss fights swinging blindly, you'll lose and you'll lose fast. Dooku is pretty simple to fight and is the least aggressive boss in the game by far. I had several points while fighting where I could just back off and get a decent force heal in without much resistance if any. Battle droids burst in during the third phase and they exist for the sole purpose of annoying you. Normally, only one pair will come out, but when I went back to get footage for this segment, they came out in waves for some reason, which was even worse. Another thing that annoyed me was Anakin's death yell, because I heard it so much growing up as I played this game. The sound is somewhat funny to me now, and I wonder if that was the best take Anakin's VA had in him, or the dev team just thought it would be funny to add that. Speaking of characters dying, I know that others have pointed it out, but Dooku's death scene is really brutal. In the movie, you can kinda see Dooku's head bounce away if you pay super close attention, while this game has you watch the life drain from his eyes up close and personal. This is how all bosses except for Sarah Keto die, so I'm assuming this was just for ease of use in terms of animation. After taking Dooku down, Anakin ends up doing the same thing he was doing before, taking on droids. These levels are fun, but nothing about them really stands out. That is until you reach the big guns and then get captured. I really enjoyed shooting down the other separatist ship. It's a nice break in the monotony without straying too far from what makes the game so fun. The next level has you take on the Magna Guards, my favorite enemy in the game. Grievous walking around above you as you take on his minions is a nice continuity touch. It's the little things like that that show you that the dev team cares and that they're willing to go the extra mile. Obi-Wan arrives on Utapau to take on Grievous, and instead of sneaking up on Grievous, the game has us walk in and take on wave after wave of droids as we go. I like this approach not only because of the combat, but it's also nice to think that Grievous would have probably known that Obi-Wan was coming for him. You fight a spider droid twice before Grievous, which is a mixed bag for me. 80% of the fight can be pretty fun, but other times you're just stuck running in circles trying to get an opening. I'm sure there's a more effective way to fight it, but everything else I tried got me killed, so I just continued with the circles. The Grievous fight is the hardest according to a lot of people, but personally I disagree. As long as you stay patient and learn his patterns, he's pretty easy overall. The spinning attack that he does is a bit annoying, but it's telegraphed. The telegraph might look weird, but it's there. Giving him a blaster was a pretty good answer to him not having the Force, and because of that, his fight feels a lot more intense than the one with Dooku. Grievous doesn't wait for you to heal before attacking. Mace Windu is the second skill gate of the game. If you haven't spent the time upgrading Anakin up to this point, beating him is near impossible. This is the point where things really start to go off the rails, so Mace is powered accordingly, being the second hardest boss in the game. Technically third, but I'm treating Anakin and Obi-Wan as interchangeable. Fighting against Mace feels like supporting a sports team that could never win easily. Things end up being super contentious right up till the last moment, and because of that, this can be the most frustrating fight in the game. This fight really should have been in the movie, but that's a discussion for another day. Mace and Anakin have this back and forth going on throughout the cutscene, showing that they're technically on the same side, but they're so different in terms of how they view Palpatine and the issues in general that a confrontation was inevitable. Again, This should have been in the movie. I don't quite like the fact that Anakin puts so much flair into killing Mace and then apparently breaks down right after. It just doesn't fit, and they really didn't even have to use the movie footage here, but they just felt like doing it, I guess. Now that Anakin is evil, he has Force Lightning and can even use it in levels before this one, which is super useful. After defeating Mace, Anakin goes to the temple to eliminate as many Jedi as possible. This is probably the level with the most replay value in the game, both for grinding to max out Anakin and to get a look into Order 66. This is one of the most influential days in Star Wars, and this level is the most insight we've gotten into the attack to this day. They do a really good job of making sure the power of the different Jedi you fight makes sense. Some Jedi go down in 2 swings, more than likely being young Padawans, while others put up a legitimate fight because they're probably masters or at least knights. They have these orcs with double-bladed lightsabers who are super annoying and exist for nothing other than to slow you down as you mow through the rest of the temple. I liked fighting them once or twice, but once they started showing up in every single encounter, I got really sick of the tedium of taking them down. Anakin ends up taking on Sara Keto, a young girl who dual wields a set of green lightsabers. It's obvious she inspired a lot of Ahsoka's look, and she somewhat fights like her. She's pretty easy to take down, but the main thing with her is conserving health. If you forget to do so like I did, you can end up jumping around trying to restore your health while running away from Sin, and that really isn't fun. Having these fights back to back was a good idea, and it helps you feel like you're in a continuation of the last level, taking on a more skilled version of the other Jedi you just took down. Fighting Sin is a little bit harder, but as long as you aren't overly aggressive, you should take him down pretty easily. Back on Utapau, Obi-Wan takes on the clones and the droids as they both try to shoot him. The clones are a lot more tactical. They tend to attack from different angles, while the droids are a lot more head-on. Dealing with them at the same time is a little odd, but it's definitely doable. I hate the gunship fight. It has always taken way too long. I probably should have used my Force ability, but you live and learn. It's really great cheesing this fight while wasting 10 minutes of my life. This was my fault. The end of the level has you on top of a vehicle as a turret shoots at you, and you have to take on a ton of clones as you get shot at. It seems like the clones will just keep coming until the turret is destroyed, but for a lot of the time you spend attacking it, there really isn't any visual indication that your attacks are even phasing it at all. So you just waste time fighting clones, which is fine if you enjoy that, but if you're rushing through to get to boss fights, it probably isn't the best. Mustafar has some of the most difficult enemies in the game, and I personally struggled a lot with the ones who have stun batons. They do a good job of showcasing that Anakin is a powerhouse, but everyone is still a threat. The level is capped off with a boss fight against Nute Gunray in a ship. I ended up wasting time by throwing my lightsaber for a few minutes, only to realize that I could use lightning and end it in a minute or two. I like that I was able to figure it out and didn't have the info fed to me. Informing you early on, then allowing you to solve problems on your own as you go throughout the game is always the best practice. Yoda and Obi-Wan go to the Jedi Temple to turn off the homing beacon, and Yoda has an actually competent AI, which is super helpful. It's basically more of the Order 66 on Utapau mission, only this time you have help. The clone assassins you face at the end of this level are awesome. Most enemies in this game who are hard to take down just tank a lot of hits, while these guys are able to move fast enough to dodge a lightsaber. Should they be able to do that? Not at all, but it's cool enough that I don't even care. Anakin vs. Obi-Wan is the main event that this game has been building up to, and it's very well done. This is my favorite fight in the movie, so I'm a little biased, but this is probably the best one in the game. It has the most content out of any boss fight, and it feels like you're fighting against the version of the characters that you yourself upgraded, having strengths in the areas that you value, making them that much harder to fight. I love coming back to this fight, because it manages to be so evenly matched that even though this is the hardest fight in the game, you feel well enough equipped to deal with it. This game has an alternate ending where you play as Anakin and things play out pretty much the same, but this time Anakin manages to defeat Obi-Wan. He is then greeted by Palpatine, who he kills. Anakin declares himself Emperor, and we fade to black. As a kid whose favorite character was Anakin, this was a dream come true. I like the fact that they went through the effort of adding this hypothetical, and the only thing that sucks is that Battlefront 3 was going to take this concept further, but the game was cancelled. This game is full of stuff that just doesn't show up in the movie it's adapting, but this part was my favorite. There's a lot of bonus content for this game, with 5 bonus missions, a versus mode, and co-op missions. The first 2 bonus missions have you taking on as many enemies as possible, then taking on a boss. The third features Anakin and is formatted like a time attack. This was probably cut content from the Mustafar level that got repurposed for platforming. The platforming itself is a little wonky, but not unbearable. The Yoda mission lets you play as a Beyblade, and it's the only point where you can play as Yoda, so you better cherish it. I wish you could play as Yoda in versus mode, and I don't think it would be that crazy to add him, but I'm not a developer, so who knows. The last bonus mission lets you fight as Darth Vader against Obi-Wan on the Death Star, and I think Vader's fighting style is a little bit off, but the fact that they even added this is enough for me. The versus mode lets you go up against almost every character with a lightsaber who shows up in the story in a ton of different arenas. There are some cool skins that can only be accessed if you put a character against themselves, which really sucks. These Sith reskins look pretty good for the time, and having the ability to choose them would make this mode even better. The co-op missions are simple and really don't require all that much teamwork, but they are nice to play with siblings. I've been playing this game for a long time, and I still have a deep love for it. The creativity is off the charts, and despite the funny bugs and horrible graphics, this game manages to still hold up for the most part almost 2 decades later. I'm sure this game won't ever get a remaster, but it would be nice to at least have a game that uses the same combat system. Jedi Fallen Order is a great game, but at times Cal can look a little too wooden with his movements, while this game managed to nail the look of a Jedi way earlier on. Fallen Order is a lot more polished in other areas, of course, so I'm not trying to argue that this game was so much more advanced comparatively. This isn't a modern game's bad video. I want the best version of every game that I play, and the smooth nature of 95% of the combat here is the best of any Star Wars game I've played. The story might be a little off and the faces might look odd at times, but this is still an amazing game that you should really give a try if you haven't yet.